In a palace that smells of perfume and power, an emperor begins to fail, quietly, steadily, as if something in the very walls is feeding on him. But the moment France needs him most, he slips away from his own strength. By the end, you'll understand how a luxury obsession inside Napoleon III's court intersected with war, propaganda, and panic to help push an empire toward collapse. If the strongest man in France can be weakened without a battlefield wound, then a nation can be conquered before the first shot is fired, and millions will pay for it in siege, hunger, and humiliation. Was Napoleon III brought down by enemy armies alone, or by a slow poison at home that hollowed out the empire from the inside? The paper is green. Not just green, but alive with it. A deep, saturated shade that looks expensive, the sort of color a man would choose to prove he is still in control. It is early morning in Chislehurst, in the damp English countryside. The house is quiet, too quiet for an emperor. Napoleon III wakes with a metallic taste in his mouth. His belly cramps. His head throbs. He sits up, then stops. The room tilts. He stares at the walls. The wallpaper is patterned with vines and arabesques. It is fashionable. It is modern. It is also, some will say later, a slow poison. Downstairs, servants whisper, not about his pain, about the telegrams, about Paris. Because Paris is not just restless. Paris is under threat, and the man who once promised France order and glory is now in exile, sweating in a bedroom that smells faintly of damp and dye. Outside, the fog presses against the windows. Inside, his empire is already ending. But what if the most intimate danger is not the Prussian armies closing in, not the politicians sharpening their knives, not even the mob in the streets? What if it is the walls themselves? 3 years earlier, he is still Emperor of the French, Napoleon III, nephew of the first Napoleon. The man who turned a republic into an empire with a vote and a vow. He believes in plebiscites, in railways, in boulevards that cut through old neighborhoods like blades, in industry, in spectacle. He also believes in destiny, that France must not fall behind Prussia, that he cannot look weak. In the summer of 1870, the pressure builds like heat behind closed curtains. There is Spain. There is a vacant throne. There is a candidate with German blood. There is a diplomatic insult, carefully trimmed and presented like a weapon. In Paris, crowds gather. They want war. Newspapers shout. Deputies posture. The emperor hesitates. He is not well. He knows what a modern war costs. But he also knows what a modern crowd demands. On July 19th, France declares war on Prussia. In the first 90 seconds of the war, nothing happens. Then, in the first weeks, everything happens. Trains move men toward the eastern frontier. Drums beat. Flags wave. And almost immediately, the machinery grinds. Supplies are late. Orders conflict. Units march and countermarch. Horses go hungry. Across the border, the Prussian system is not glamorous. It is efficient. The emperor rides out anyway. He puts on a uniform. He sits a horse. He tries to look like his uncle, but the battlefield does not care about costume. So when the first disasters arrive, France does not just lose ground. France begins to lose faith. And if faith breaks, what holds an empire together? In August, the defeats come in waves. Wissembourg, Forbach, Spicheren, names that will later be spoken like bruises. Reports reach Paris. Ministers argue. Deputies demand explanations. The Empress Eugénie stays in the Tuileries palace and tries to keep a face of calm. Napoleon III is with the army. He sees confusion up close. He sees maps that do not match reality. He sees generals who do not trust each other. He also feels pain that he cannot confess. His body is failing him. He passes blood. He cannot sit comfortably. At times, he cannot focus. He tells himself that victory will cure everything. Then the army is pushed back towards Sedan. Sedan is a town near the Belgian border. A trap of hills and rivers. A place where an army can be surrounded. On September the 1st, the cannon begins. It is not the old thunder of a few guns. It is an industrial roar. Shells smash into villages. Smoke rolls across fields. Men crawl and scream and vanish. The emperor is there. He moves through the chaos. He tries to be seen. But visibility is not command. By afternoon, French positions collapse. Prussian and allied German forces tighten the ring. The emperor watches a slaughter he cannot stop. When evening comes, he makes a decision that ends a dynasty. On September 2nd, 1870, Napoleon III surrenders. Not just an army, himself. He becomes a prisoner. News races to Paris, and in the city, the question is not military anymore. It is political. It is personal. If the emperor has surrendered, who has the right to speak for France? Quick recap. Here's what we know so far, and the one detail that still doesn't fit. The wallpaper wasn't just decorative. It was chemistry, moisture, and heat, working like a patient machine. So why did the sickest rooms in the palace all share the same pattern? Stop thinking of poison as a murder plot, because this one could be an accident with a body count, and the first clue is hidden in the color green. Paris receives the news like a shock, then like a fever. Crowds surge, deputies gather. The Empress is told to flee. On September 4th, the Second Empire falls. In the chamber, voices declare a republic. In the streets, people shout, not with one voice, but with many. Some celebrate, some rage, some look for someone to blame. Eugénie escapes, disguised out through back doors and side streets. The imperial court dissolves in hours. In Germany, Napoleon III is moved. He is no longer useful as a symbol of imperial power. He is useful as proof of French defeat. The victors treat him with a sort of cold courtesy. He writes, he thinks, he tries to craft a narrative where he is not simply the man who lost, but outside his window, the war continues. Because the fall of an emperor does not end a siege. Prussian armies move toward Paris, and Paris, proud and furious, prepares to be strangled. The city's new leaders form a government of national defense. They promise resistance. They also inherit a problem no speech can solve. Paris is a great mouth, and it must be fed. What happens when the capital of France becomes a closed room with no air? Doctors blamed nerves and age, but the symptoms kept returning in one place and easing in another. If it wasn't the emperor's body failing, what was the building doing to him? The siege begins in September 1870. Paris is encircled, rail lines are cut, roads are controlled. The ring is not perfect at first, but it tightens. At the edges of the city, forts stand like clenched teeth. Inside, life tries to continue. Cafes open, newspapers print, theaters attempt performances. It is an act of defiance. It is also denial. Bakeries ration flour. Meat becomes scarce. The wealthy hoard. The poor queue. The National Guard swells with volunteers. Men who have never fired a rifle are handed uniforms and told they are the wall. Balloons lift off from the city, carrying mail and officials over the enemy lines. Pigeons return with messages in tiny tubes. Paris becomes a laboratory of improvisation, but each day, the calendar advances and the storehouses shrink. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some say relief armies are coming. Some say the government will betray the people. Outside, the Prussian command calculates. It does not need to storm the city. It can wait. It can let hunger do the work. In the salons and in the garrets, Parisians ask the same question, in different tones. How long can we endure? A modern empire runs on schedules, and Napoleon III starts missing them. Meetings cut short, decisions delayed, commands softened. In a crisis, who steps into the silence when the throne goes quiet? Now zoom in on the wallpaper itself, because the prettiest pigment in Europe had a habit of turning rooms into invisible gas chambers. So who kept ordering it anyway? As autumn turns, the city learns new flavors. First, the horses, then the animals from the zoo. There is dark humor in the menus. There is also a deepening anger. Because hunger is not only physical, it is political. The Republic is young and fragile. Its leaders argue over strategy and honor. They speak of sorties and of diplomacy. The working class districts watch and listen. They hear promises. They feel cold. In October, uprisings flicker. Not yet the full blaze, but sparks. People storm buildings. They demand more radical action. They demand that Paris fight, or that Paris govern itself. The government responds with arrests, with speeches, with attempts at unity. The cannons remain on the horizon. And then the winter arrives. Coal is scarce, wood is expensive, rooms grow damp, walls sweat, clothing never fully dries. Families crowd into single heated spaces when there is heat at all. Disease begins to follow the cold. And still, the city resists. Not because resistance is easy, because surrender feels like humiliation. But humiliation is already in the air. The emperor is gone. The empire's gone. So what exactly is Paris defending now? Quick recap. Here's what we know so far, and the one detail that still doesn't fit. France prepares for war with Prussia, and Paris talks itself into confidence. But what if the emperor's weakness was already visible to the enemy before a single battle began? Across the Channel, Napoleon III is no longer a prisoner. He is released into exile. He arrives in England in March 1871. But he is already there in spirit long before that, imagining the moment when France might call him back. He settles with Eugène and their son in a rented house at Chislehurst. The neighborhood is quiet. The people are polite. And for a former emperor, politeness can feel like a kind of cage. He reads French newspapers when they arrive. He traces the events with a finger, as if he can touch Paris through ink. During the siege, he is a ghost in the story. Some blame him for everything. Some nostalgically miss the certainty his regime pretended to offer. He himself insists that he was forced by circumstances, by ministers, by public opinion. He writes defenses of his policy. But the body does not accept political arguments. His illness persists. He grows thinner. He wakes at night, and the house around him seems to conspire in small discomforts. The air is wet. The smell of the rooms is stale. The wallpaper, with its brilliant green, looks almost too vivid in lamplight. In the 19th century, that shade often comes from arsenic-based pigments, a fashionable beauty that can turn deadly when dampness releases it into the air. It is a perfect metaphor, a modern luxury with a hidden cost. But is it metaphor, or is it literally killing him? The court treats the illness like a private embarrassment, something to hide behind curtains and etiquette. So who benefited most from keeping the cause a secret? Forget the battlefield for a moment, because the decisive struggle may have been inside Napoleon III's lungs, right before a decision France couldn't undo. Back in Paris, the siege reaches its bitter end. January 1871. The city is exhausted. There are sorties, brave and futile. There are losses that cannot be replaced. The Prussians begin to bombard. Not a total destruction, not the apocalyptic shelling some fear, but enough to make the threat tangible. Explosions in the distance, glass shaking, children startled awake. The government faces the arithmetic of starvation. It negotiates. An armistice is signed. Paris has endured. Paris has also been beaten. Then comes the peace. Or what is called peace. France must accept harsh terms. Territory, money, pride. And then, in a final twist of humiliation, German forces are permitted a symbolic entry into Paris. The idea alone is unbearable to many Parisians. The anger that built in hunger now looks for a target. The National Guard, armed and politicized, becomes a force that does not easily lay down its weapons. The government, now seated at Versailles, does not trust the capital. The capital does not trust Versailles. The siege has ended. But the city is still a closed room, full of smoke. So who will strike the match? Here's the unsettling part. Arsenic doesn't have to be swallowed to harm you. If it can rise from the walls into the air, how many people were breathing the same slow danger? March 1871. Paris wakes to a new crisis. The government tries to seize cannons from the National Guard. Those cannons are more than metal. They are a symbol of Parisian sacrifice and Parisian power. In the working-class heights of Montmartre, soldiers arrive, crowds gather, voices rise, orders are given. And then discipline breaks. Soldiers refuse to fire on civilians. 2 generals are captured and killed. The government retreats to Versailles. Paris declares itself. The Commune is born. It is not one ideology in one uniform. It is a coalition of radicals, socialists, republicans, anarchists, patriots. Some want social justice. Some want revenge. Some want autonomy. What they share is a refusal to return to the old obedience. Paris begins to govern itself. It organizes committees. It issues decrees. It celebrates. It argues. Outside the city, Versailles gathers an army. Inside, the Commune tries to build a future while preparing for a siege of its own. And in exile, Napoleon III watches the Republic fracture. He must wonder, privately, if chaos will make his return possible. But can a fallen emperor ever come back as anything other than a memory? Quick recap. Here's what we know so far, and the one detail that still doesn't fit. As the emperor falters, policy starts moving in contradictions, bold speeches, hesitant actions. Was France being led, or was it being managed by whoever could function that day? Hold that thought, because while Paris is stocking cannons, the real shortage is something else entirely, and it's about to change how people eat, pray, and riot. The Commune lasts just over 2 months. It is long enough to inspire. It is long enough to terrify. Versailles propaganda paints the communards as criminals and arsonists. Communard newspapers paint Versailles as traitors who surrendered to Prussia. Both sides believe they are saving France. The city prepares defenses. Barricades rise. Streets become fortifications. Churches and public buildings become political stages. There are reforms, some real, some symbolic. Debates over education, labor, rents, but time is short. The Versailles army grows stronger. The Prussians, still nearby, watch with cold interest. In May, Versailles troops break into Paris. What follows is not a battle in a field. It is a battle in neighborhoods. House to house, street to street. The sound of gunfire becomes constant. Smoke rises from burning buildings. The city that survived the Prussian ring now bleeds from within. This week will be called the Bloody Week. And when it ends, thousands are dead, many more are arrested. Some are deported. Paris is forced back under the authority it rejected. The siege is over, the Commune is crushed, and France is trying to be a republic. So where does that leave the man who once claimed the nation as his inheritance? Then the war turns, fast. Orders misfire, opportunities vanish, and the margin for error collapses. At what moment did a health problem become a national security problem? At Chislehurst, Napoleon III becomes a man of rooms. He walks when he can. He rests when he must. Visitors come. Loyalists. Curious onlookers. Old officials who speak in lowered voices. They bring gossip from France. They bring hope, sometimes, but hope is now a fragile thing. Because France does not look back toward him. France looks forward, even through pain. The emperor's health worsens. The specific ailment is discussed in whispers and in doctors' notes. Stones. Infection. Chronic suffering. He tries treatments. He endures. And all the while, the house holds its own quiet mystery. That green wallpaper. The color is fashionable in Victorian Britain and in France. It comes from pigments that can contain arsenic. In damp conditions, it can release toxins. People at the time argue about it. Some dismiss it as hysteria. Some swear it is real. In this house, damp is not theoretical. The air clings to fabric. The plaster feels cold. If poison is in the paper, it is in the lungs. Napoleon III coughs. He sweats. He cannot shake fatigue. But how do you separate a sick empire from a sick body? Is he dying because history crushed him, or because his bedroom is killing him? A siege doesn't begin with cannons. It begins with miscalculation. So what if the first breach in France's defenses wasn't in a wall, but in the emperor's ability to decide? Here's the twist in the timeline. The empire doesn't fall in one dramatic day. It unravels in tiny absences. So which absence mattered most? To understand his fall, you have to understand his paradox. Napoleon III is often remembered as a cartoon, a failed imitator of Napoleon I, a dandy with a moustache, a man outplayed by Bismarck. There is truth in the caricature. But it is not the whole truth. He is also a modernizer. Under him, France expands its rail networks. Banks grow. Paris is rebuilt. He encourages industry. He uses spectacle to create legitimacy. He uses spectacle to create legitimacy. He offers prosperity to quiet demands for liberty. And for a time it works, yet his system depends on success. It depends on the sense that he can deliver stability. Once war exposes weakness, the whole structure wobbles. Then it collapses. The surrender at Sedan is not just a military defeat. It is a psychological rupture, a monarch captured like an ordinary soldier. A dynasty ending not in a palace coup, but in a telegram. Paris under siege becomes the proof that his promise was hollow, and the Commune becomes the proof that the old social order is in question. Even in exile, his name is part of the argument. Bonapartists claim he was betrayed. Republicans claim he was a fraud. But the public has moved on to new fears. The fear of invasion. The fear of invasion. The fear of civil war. The fear of the poor with guns. So if France is not coming back to him, what is he waiting for? Quick recap. Here's what we know so far, and the one detail that still doesn't fit. In Paris, rumors spread faster than bread disappears, and every explanation becomes a weapon. If people can't see the poison, who do they choose to blame instead? In January 1873, the suffering narrows. The doctors decide on surgery. It is dangerous. Medicine in the 19th century is advancing, but it is still a gamble. Anesthesia exists, but infection is a constant threat. The operation aims to relieve him, to remove stones, to give him back time. Eugenie waits. Their son waits. The household holds its breath. Napoleon III goes under the knife. For a moment, there is hope. Then the complications come. Fever, weakness, the slow slide that so often follows invasive surgery in that era. On January 9, 1873, Napoleon III dies, not on a battlefield, not on a throne, in exile. A former emperor in a rented English house. Afterward, people argue over causes. Some point to the illness that plagued him for years, some point to the operation, and some still point to the wallpaper. Green, damp, and fashionable. A poison hiding in decoration. It is an idea that refuses to disappear because it fits too well. A modern empire, bright with progress, quietly toxic underneath. But is it true? Did the walls help kill him, or did they simply give the world a better story? Some say it was simply history, doing what history does, rising powers, falling empires. But why do the records keep circling back to the same domestic detail? The rooms, the decor, the air. Listen carefully, because the propaganda doesn't start after defeat. It starts while victory is still being promised and someone is already writing the scapegoat. The wallpaper question matters for a reason beyond scandal. It forces us to think about how history explains suffering. We prefer a single culprit, a villain we can point to, a substance we can name. Arsenic has that appeal. Invisible, deadly, seemingly controllable, if only someone had known. But empires do not fall like that. They fall through systems, through choices, through pride, through miscalculation, through the gap between the story a regime tells and the reality people live. Napoleon III tells a story of modern France. Then he gambles that story on war. Bismarck understands the gamble better. Prussia is ready. France is not. Sedan happens. Paris starves. The Republic is born under siege. Then Paris turns its guns inward, the Commune burns. And the Third Republic, baptized in hunger and blood, hardens into something that will last. Napoleon III becomes a cautionary figure, not only about war, about legitimacy, about what happens when public opinion is treated as something to manage rather than something to answer. So when we stare at the green wallpaper, we are also staring at the temptation to simplify. If a toxin killed him, perhaps the fall was just misfortune. But if his empire killed him, then the story is heavier. And it points toward a question we still live with. When a society is decorated with progress, how do we know what is poisoning it from the inside? By the time the empire collapses, the question isn't just who lost the war. It's whether France was already compromised, physically, politically, and chemically, before the fighting began. Step back into Paris, and you can feel how quickly a city can become a symbol. During the siege, Paris is the heart of France. If it beats, the nation lives. If it stops, the nation is humiliated. That belief gives strength. It also invites catastrophe, because the heart can be starved. Paris survives months of isolation. It invents methods to communicate. It turns hunger into pride. But hunger also turns neighbors into rivals. It turns politics into suspicion. It turns every rumor into a potential riot. The siege creates a population trained for hardship and armed for resistance. Then the armistice asks that population to accept defeat quietly. That is a fantasy. The Commune is not an accident. It is a consequence. It is what happens when people feel they have paid for the nation and are now told they do not get to speak. Versailles fears Paris. Paris fears Versailles, and the wounds of the siege are still open. So the city fights itself, and the Republic is born in contradiction. It promises liberty. It enforces order with gunfire. This is not unique to France. But France lives it in the most dramatic way possible, in the capital of Europe's imagination. If the siege taught Paris to endure, did it also teach Paris to rebel? Napoleon III, in death, becomes quieter than his legend. His enemies reduce him to incompetence. His supporters polish him into tragedy. The truth sits uneasily between. He is a man shaped by the shadow of his uncle. He believes he can use modern tools to control modern forces. He believes he can offer prosperity in exchange for obedience. And for years that bargain holds, until it doesn't. War exposes the limits of image. Sedan exposes the limits of charisma. The siege exposes the limits of a capital-centered idea of France. And the Commune exposes the limits of national unity. After his death, the Bonapartist dream fades. His son will not restore the empire. France will not return to that story. Instead, the Third Republic will stumble forward. It will be unstable. It will be stubborn. It will endure. And Paris will remain a stage where French politics becomes theater, sometimes brilliant, sometimes brilliant. Which returns us to that room in England, a former emperor staring at a wall. The green pattern, beautiful and suspicious. A reminder that what surrounds us can shape us. That environments, like regimes, can be deadly without appearing so. So when we ask whether poison hid in the wallpaper, we are asking something larger. Was Napoleon III undone by chemistry, by enemies, by his own decisions, or by the era itself? And if all of those forces were in the room with him, which one truly delivered the final blow?